I spent the last few hours watching and rewatching Donald Trump's interview with Kristen Welker on NBC's Meet the Press. And, part of a functioning democracy is having politicians, especially senior leaders, be grilled by journalists. That helps us get a sense of what they really mean rather than just what they say. And it's an opportunity for the media to do its job. He doesn't really go anywhere near the mainstream or corporate media at all. And by claiming that they were the enemy of the people and that they were fake news, he created this chasm between himself and the media, which meant that he could write the narrative with no pushback. He claimed that they were the enemy, and yet he needed them. He needed them to cover him saying that they were fake. So I just want to play some of this interview. I know we don't really want to see his face or listen to his voice, but it's kind of essential in this particular analysis because there's a lot of psychological warfare going on. He does this naturally. This is the way he communicates. And so I just want to highlight some of these things and explain the reality of a lot of the things that he says, because most of what he says is untrue and does not get the kind of pushback that you or I would do if we were shouting at the television. The problem is when you have Donald Trump in the room, you have to keep him in the room. And Kristen Welker is doing her best to do that. She's employing some tactics like referring to him as Sir, the types of things that are likely to stop him from quitting the interview and leaving. And so because he is so insecure and so distrusting of mainstream media, she's having to dangle little carrots or give him little sugar lumps in order to maintain not just his attention, but also to prevent him from just cutting and running.
What do you plan to accomplish in your first 100 days in office?
Well, we're going to do something with the border, and very strong, very powerful. That'll be our first signal, and a first signal to America that we're not playing games. We have people coming in by the millions, as you know, and a lot of people shouldn't be here. Most of them shouldn't be here, but we have jails being emptied into our country. We have mental institutions from all over the world being emptied into our country. So
he starts the interview with, we have millions of people coming into our country and we're going to do something at the border. So again, this is very vague, isn't it? Do something at the border, which suggests that there is no specific plan, because all of his propaganda during the election campaign was, we're going to close the border. So he's now not saying we're going to close the border. And as I and many others told you, they can't close the border. It is not physically possible to do that. So he's effectively going to have to renege on that concept of border closure. We're going to do something at the border.
We're going to be extending within that period, or as soon as we can, the Trump tax cuts, because, they're coming due and they're very substantial for people. And it would be I think it will anger a lot of people, frankly, if we don't get an extension of that. That's what led us to one of the greatest economies ever.
And then he jumps straight into the Trump tax cuts, as he calls them, and says, if we don't do them, people will be very upset. What he's referring to here is cutting the rate of corporation tax, the amount of tax that the wealthiest people and corporations pay. He cut it significantly when he was in office the first time. That is due to run out in early 2025. And so he's going to kind of put that onto statute once again. That is a thank you to his wealthy benefactors and donors, the people that supported him at the highest level, including Elon Musk, to guarantee that they don't pay any more tax than they want to. What he's not doing is reducing the rate of tax for regular working people. That is not something that he ever offered. He's always been very vague with the language, talking about tax cuts, but he never meant regular working people. He only ever was talking about corporation tax. And then there's this trickle-down economics, which they never really talk about. They just presume that people know that that's what they mean. Meaning if the corporations get a tax cut, then that will somehow filter down to the workers, which bears no resemblance to reality or truth.
We're going to be focusing on crime in the cities. And we'll work with Democrat governors. Most of them are, as you know, if you look at the 25 worst places, they're just about all Democrat-controlled cities and states. And we're going to be working with Democrat governors and Democrat mayors. And I look forward to doing it.
And then he talks about crime and says he's going to be working with Democrats and with Democrat mayors and governors. I mean, this was never discussed in the campaign. This is not something he's ever spoken about before. And now he's, I guess, either backtracking or trying to set the stage for the fact that he will be challenged by Democratic lawmakers. And we've heard people like Gavin Newsom in California are already putting measures in place to prevent the Trump administration from trying to kind of change any of the local laws in the state.
And we're going to have a lot of other things. We'll be working on nominations. We're going to still be working on some nominations. I think they're going very well. We have, for the most part, I think they're going extremely well. It looks like Pete is doing well now. I mean, people were a little bit concerned. He's a young guy with a tremendous track record, actually. He went to Princeton and went to Harvard. He was a good student at both, but he loves the military, and I think people are starting to see it. So we'll be working on his nomination along with a lot of others. And
then he continues to claim that in his first 100 days, he's going to continue working on nominations and talks about Pete. He's referring to Pete Hegseth, is a guy off of Fox News who Trump saw on Fox News and obviously has been hanging out with at Mar-a-Lago, and claims that he's really into the military. And that's why he should be given the job of running the US military. I mean, it is bonkers, and yet Trump says it with a straight face.
And he's basically a military guy. I mean, every time I talk to him, all he wants to talk about is the military. He's a military guy. I used to kid him about it. I didn't think he would be in this position where he may be, hopefully will be Secretary of Defense. But every time I was with him, he was fighting for soldiers, where he said some soldier was unjustly put in prison because they were really doing what they were taught to do in some cases. So, yeah, I think he's going to do fine.
So now we're hearing that Donald Trump is trying to boost Pete Hegseth's interest in the military because he's asked to get a few friends out of their convictions. This is increasingly insane, but it is also a window into the simplicity of Donald Trump's thinking.
The fact that he said to some senators reportedly he'll stop drinking if he gets this job, does that worry you?
No, I think that everybody has something that they can stop. Some people can stop eating. I'm lucky I'm not a drinker, but I could stop eating. And we all want to stop doing something. And if he said that, I mean, that's a nice thing to say. That's a good thing to say. But he's very respected. I can tell you, I know a lot of the people at Fox, they think he's fantastic. And the people that work with him, really, they love him.
This is remarkable, isn't it? That the people at Fox, they love him. Well, Fox has employed him and saying, well, if he gets this job, he's going to give up drinking. And Donald Trump saying, well, I didn't hear that, but it's nice to hear that, and that's good, and people can give stuff up. You know, I don't drink, but I could give up food. I mean, no talk about alcoholism or addiction. There's no depth to any of this talk or this thinking, and it is a little frustrating that the interviewer isn't pushing back on these things. But like I said at the beginning, she is stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea, because if she pushes back too much, he's going to say, you're fake news and I'm leaving. So she has to allow him to talk, even if he's talking garbage.
He's making a lot of money at Fox. They're doing very well. And I said, you know, if for some reason you don't get this thing, you're not going to be able to go back. And all that money you're making, you can kiss it goodbye. He said, this is all about America. You know, he didn't say, well, let me think about it. Let me discuss it. That's a very big, risky thing he's doing. When he goes and he says, I'm going to give up, millions of dollars in order to possibly become the Secretary of Defense. A lot of people would say it's a great position. It's probably almost no greater position, but a lot of people would say, I have to think about it. He said, I don't have to think about it.
And if you thought that Trump's answer was bad the first time, now he just doubles down on the fact that Pete Hegseth could just stay at Fox and make millions. I don't think he's paid millions for his weekend show on Fox. He's not one of Fox's biggest stars. Remember, on Fox, he's the same guy who said that he had never washed his hands for a decade because He hasn't seen germs, and if he can't see them, then they don't exist. I have a feeling that all of this stuff that Trump is saying is simply not true. He's trying to make Pete Hegseth out to be some great patriot because he's saying he'll give up his job at Fox to be the Secretary of Defense, and says that he can't go back to his job afterwards. And none of that makes any sense. Fox would be much more likely to want to employ Pete Hegseth after he'd failed at being the Secretary of Defense, even for a few short weeks. That's just how they work. So all of that is just nonsense. And again, is a window into Donald Trump's mind. There's nothing going on in there.
Economists of all stripes say that ultimately consumers pay the price of tariffs.
I don't believe
Can you guarantee American families won't pay more?
I can't guarantee anything. I can't guarantee tomorrow. But I can say that if you look at just pre-COVID, we had the greatest economy in the history of our country. And I had a lot of tariffs on a lot of different countries, but in particular China. We took in hundreds of billions of dollars, and we had no inflation. In fact, when I handed it over, they didn't have inflation for a year and a half. They went almost 2 years just based on what I had created.
Trump is trying to rewrite the narrative again about having the greatest economy in the history of our nation when he was the president before COVID, which is simply not true. He's talking about Barack Obama's economy, that in Obama's second term, after the crash, the subprime mortgage crash that crashed the world economy because of over-leveraging, and Obama then in his second 4 years was able to steady the ship and start to see growth, and the trajectory of the growth chart did not change under Donald Trump. It just continued. So Trump is, again, taking credit for something that he had absolutely nothing to do with. It didn't suddenly spike when Trump took over. It just continued as it was. So that's the first thing. But then he talks about like there was no inflation, and suddenly there was inflation. This, again, this is not the language of economics. This is not the language of intelligence or analysis. This is just him saying a whole bunch of words over and over again to psychologically brainwash his supporters into parroting what it is that he wants them to say. It's very clever. It's kind of simple, but clearly it has worked.
Tariffs are properly used, are a very powerful tool, not only economically, but also for getting other things outside of economics.
Donald Trump's obsession with tariffs is going to crash the US and potentially the world economy. It's really the only thing that he talks about when it comes to fiscal policy. And I fear that by throwing all of his economic eggs into the tariff basket, there is no other mechanism for growing the US economy.
Can you guarantee American families won't pay more?
I can't guarantee anything.
All economists on all sides have all criticized these tariffs and said that they will not do what Donald Trump thinks that they will do. But you see, to get inside his mind on this for a second, he prefers to use tariffs as leverage. He likes to bribe people or emotionally blackmail people with tariffs. If you don't do that, I'll do this. And that's really how he sees them. That's how he does business. That's how he does so-called deals, is basically by blackmailing people. And what is so worrying about this is that he doesn't really care whether tariffs will cost the consumer more. It's completely not of interest to him because it's just about enriching himself and his wealthy benefactors. I mean, these are the only people that he cares about big business and growing big business and making rich companies even richer. But the actual idea that regular people, working people, will be the ones paying for this is of no interest to him. And I just wish people would understand that. That he really does not think about people and wages and debt and the cost of living and inflation for regular people. He only thinks about wealthy people, corporation tax, and the stock market. And that is it. And only the stock market because he's now on the stock market with DJT Media.
They cost Americans nothing. They made a great economy for us. They also solve another problem. If we were going to have problems having to do with wars and having to do with other things, tariffs, I have stopped wars with tariffs.
Will you punish CEOs who try to pass the cost of tariffs on to their customers?
Well, the market's going to take care of it. I mean, actually, the market takes care of it. And if it doesn't, we adjust it somewhat. But in the case of Whirlpool, or let's say companies that made washing machines, they were all being put out of business by the dumping from, in particular, South Korea and China.
When Donald Trump says that the market will take care of itself, that is again him denying that this is really anything to do with him. So he basically wants to make the mess. He wants to be able to steal from the poor and give it to the rich. And he doesn't care what comes from that. He just knows that once the rich get rich, that's all that really matters. And he's relying on the market to find its equilibrium. Once again, Donald Trump is basing all of his economic ideas on random conversations that he's had on people. He's not looking at any data. He's not looking at any facts. When he talks about these tariffs and the fact that they didn't cost the American consumer a dime, that is not based on anything. That is just based on his narcissistic personality disorder. His tunnel vision, where he can only see himself making good decisions. But you know, people are struggling. People are going hungry. People are freezing. They can't afford to put the heat on. And he doesn't really notice any of that stuff. He's just celebrating the fact that he prevented Whirlpool from going out of business. And by comparing South Korea's economy to America's economy, he's completely missing the point. The US is effectively the largest economy in the world. Huge amounts of power. But that is because we trade internationally. That is because we take in corporation taxes. What he's effectively saying is he's going to reduce corporation tax and rely entirely on tariffs to pay down the national debt. So where's that money going to come from? It's going to come from consumers, because they're the ones who will be bringing in the tax, because they're the ones who are going to be buying the cost of inflated goods and paying the tariffs. If the money's not coming from corporation taxes because he's cutting, they've got to come from somewhere. This, to me, is a recipe to increase the national debt. The man comes to the table with no plan. Just the word tariffs, a beautiful word, I should remind you. It's such a beautiful word.
I think tariffs are the most beautiful word. I think they're beautiful. It's going to make us rich.
It's remarkable.
We have millions of people pouring into our country. You agree with that?
This is a tactic that Trump does. He says something that is false. We have millions of people pouring into our country. You agree with that. So he projects that the interviewer or the journalist is in agreement without giving them a chance to answer. And that is, again, it's like some kind of technique for doubling down on a lie, but convincing the audience who support him that what he's saying is true. It's clever. Again, it's subtle, it's simple, but it is effective. You agree with that? You see, I did it myself just then. That is how Donald Trump operates. He manages somehow to convince people who are asking him questions that they know what he knows is correct, even though they haven't said that it is.
We can't have open borders. And I said to the president of Mexico and to Justin Trudeau, if it doesn't stop, I'm going to put tariffs on your country at about 25%. That's a very substantial tariff. And in both cases, but in the case where it was really visible, within 10 minutes after that phone call, we noticed that the people coming across the border, the southern border, having to do with Mexico, they were at a trickle, just a trickle. It was, in fact, I call the border. See, unlike my opponent, I do call the border a lot. And I said, how's the border looking today? They said, there's nobody here. They couldn't believe it.
Okay, so let's get this straight. Donald Trump threatens Canada and Mexico with 25% tariffs if they don't stop the flow of immigrants or the flow of drugs. And maybe he's doing it as a negotiating tactic, or maybe he's doing it because he's actually going to impose the tariffs. Nobody really knows, because he doesn't know either. And then he claims that after calling the president of Mexico, whose name he clearly doesn't know, he then phones the border. Now, I don't know what number that is that he's calling or which part of the border, which is tens of thousands of miles long. Maybe he's phoning the whole border. Hello, border. Yes. Is anyone there? Oh, there isn't. A trickle. He said within 10 minutes of him suggesting that this tariff would be on Mexico at 25%, he phones the border and suddenly there's no one there. This is proof of A, the emperor having no clothes, B, of a liar in chief, a narcissist and egomaniac, claiming that he can make a phone call and 10 minutes later, no one wants to come to the border. I mean, it is proof that everything he says is based in fantasy and not reality. And this is who Donald Trump is. He lives in his own head. Nothing that is going on in reality in our world bears any resemblance to the world that he inhabits. And I really just wish that people would understand that this is a man who is only out for himself. The fact that this world has people in it is inconvenient to Donald Trump. He would much rather it was just him and his Mar-a-Lago friends and maybe Jeffrey Epstein. He just wants to hang out and play golf and just do his thing. He doesn't want a president. He doesn't want to make life more affordable for people. He does not want to take on all of these responsibilities. He doesn't want to read. He doesn't want to study. He doesn't want to look at data. He doesn't want to deal with facts. He just wants to go on his instinct, on a whim, or on conversations he's had with people while he's playing golf. And that is how he wants to run the country. Now, for the sycophants and for the people obsessed with Donald Trump, that is good enough for them. For the rest of us, that is the description of a despot. That is the description of an authoritarian. That is the description of somebody who lives completely on their own terms. And what he fails to consider, and this was very much the case during his first administration, is that there is a world and certainly a country of 330 million people who are having to respond to his rules and to live by his decisions and to live off the back of these whims that he might have. So reducing corporation tax and increasing tariffs will be great for him and his wealthy friends, but for the rest of us, it spells disaster.
I can't guarantee anything. I can't guarantee tomorrow.
I'm Anthony Davis. You can find me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, and on Sunday on The Weekend Show with Midas Touch.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Midas by signing up to the Midas Touch newsletter at MidasTouch.com/newsletter.